Ariane, I'd like to ask you to make a presentation within the time provided. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good day for everyone, and especially Indonesian ambassador to Uni Eropa. I speak on behalf of Indonesian civil society living outside Papua, who are very disappointed for Indonesian government approach to Papua. I have to say to Indonesian government's representative here that we cannot lie to ourselves any longer for the state of human rights violation in Papua. We have to admit it. And I have to ask the DROI Committee of European Parliament for your attention of the situation in Papua. Democratization in Indonesia is praised by the world, but we should know that after 15 years of Indonesian reform, there is no fundamental change on approach by the government to deal with the Papuan issue, especially on civil and political rights. Military deployment and repression coined during the Suharto dictatorship in order to crush pro-independence groups and to secure corporate power is continuing without real civilian control. A peaceful dialogue as a means to negotiate and to find solution and compromise, as proclaimed by President Yudhoyono in 2010, and also he repeated in 2011, and proposed by many stakeholders in Papua, is less and less popular within Jakarta's administrations. For Jakarta, dealing with injustice and poverty in Papua is to eradicate often arbitrarily labeled pro-independence groups and dividing civil society through intelligence operations, dividing administrative regions against the law and the consents of the Papuan people, and pouring in money that spurs corruptions and benefits mostly elites and transmigrants. Jakarta's approach to Papua so far is widely considered as having failed due to its lack of participatory design and the focus on elitist economic and rights aspects. Jakarta's approach to Papua today has failed and should be evaluated. The approach is closely tied to the old development paradigm of seeing Papua people as enemy rather than family. Do not merely blame Papuan elites for the failure of development in Papua. There is also need to evaluate the policies itself and the way central government seeing Papua. The implementation of Special Autonomy Law number 21, year 2001, and the division of the Papuan provinces through Presidential Decree number 1, 2003, have worsened the Papua-Jakarta relations. Without any participatory evaluations of the current policies, the government has formed the Unit for the Accelerations of Development in Papua and West Papua, or UP-FOB, in 2011, and later agreed to the suggestions of Lukas NMB, Papua Governor, to Special Autonomy Plus 2013, which merely means the expansions of the governor's authority. Democratic rights and participation are lacking in this process. A solution to the conflict and violation in Papua can only be sustainable if it's drafted in consultations with the majority of the people, civil society organizations, religious and indigenous groups and leaders, legal provincial bodies such as MRP and DPRP. Until today, Papua comprises the richest provinces, but shows the highest poverty rates and the lowest human development index of the country. Jakarta claims that addressing the economic problem through infrastructure, health and education sector development would sufficiently address the grievances of Papuans. But however, the uncontrolled inflow of development project funds in the widely military-controlled province has only spurred corruptions and widened the gap between rich and poor. But all eyes are on eastern part of Indonesia nowadays, especially Papua, and Papua is the star. More investment are expected to go there through the latest economic investment scheme. the Master Plan for Acceleration and Expansions of Indonesian Economic Development, or MP3EI. The European Union, as Indonesia's fourth largest trading partner after Japan, China and Singapore, and as the second largest investor in Indonesian economy, is likely one of them, maybe. And for that, we need to push Indonesian government to have more political openness. Openness in a market economy should be followed by openness in political approach to conflict. Dialogue is very much still relevant, since it's never started. EU support and pressure for dialogue is important, and in the meantime, military deployment should be evaluated and monitored. Special UN rapporteur should be able to pay visit. Human rights defender and journalists should be protected. Political prisoners should be freed, and ones who got very sick and mentally ill are priority. And the right to assemble and organize protest actions should be guaranteed, like in other parts of Indonesia. Jakarta is in a position of no or low interest to the proposed Jakarta-Papua dialogue for, I think, two reasons. The framework of NKRI, or Indonesian unity, not being negotiable, and an increasing climate hostile to human rights highlighted by the absence of fair investigation and trial to any human rights violation cases. I think Munir, the famous human rights violation cases, is the best examples of this backward approach. Wamena and Wasio human rights violations are the two examples of investigated cases of gross human rights violation by National Human Rights Commission in Indonesia, but is in a deadlock with the Attorney General. These are indicators to see the possible change of approach by the central government to Papua. Even though President Yudhoyono has in the past promised his support for a dialogue, these statements have so far not substantiated to a process that Papuans see progressing. A growing international concern for the situation in Papua was voiced at the Universal Periodic Report, or UPR, in 2012, and from the Pacific nations to the Melanesian spearhead groups, or MSG. It is therefore important to continue encouraging the central government side to honor its commitments and to show a visible progress in resolving the conflict peacefully in light of the upcoming national election between April and August 2014. An end to human rights violations are the precondition to a peaceful and sustainable end of the conflict in Papua that continue to cause the suffering of the civilians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you. West Papua is a place marked by fear, violence, military presence, isolation, and a high level of social disparity. The exploitation of natural resources, usually without the free, prior and informed consent of local communities, and the ongoing influx of non-Papuan settlers result in a marginalization of indigenous Papuans, who now make up less than 50% of the population. A high deployment of military personnel and special police forces in this civil conflict frequently results in extrajudicial killings, torture and arbitrary arrests. Independence activists are being targeted. Last month, the Asian Human Rights Commission reported about the death of West Papuan independence activist Danny Kogoya in Vanimo, Papua New Guinea on December 15. In 2012, he had fled to the neighboring country, like many other political activists, fearing arrest, torture or being killed in Indonesia. In Papua New Guinea, Danny received medical treatment for his right leg, which had been amputated without his consent in Papua, Indonesia, 3 months earlier, after he had been shot by Indonesian security forces during his arrest on September 2, 2012. The cause of death in Papua New Guinea was reported to be liver failure due to the presence of unusual chemical substances in his body. A Vanimo court classified his death as a case of murder and called for an autopsy. The autopsy was later prevented due to intervention by Indonesian state authorities, raising suspicions of their involvement in Danny Kogoya's death through poisoning. Between October 2011 and March last year, Papuan human rights organizations have documented more than 25 extrajudicial killings in Papua. Military raids in villages in remote areas lead to more frustration and resentment among Papuans. After 2 members of military battalion 756 had crashed with a motorcycle into a Papuan child in the highlands on June 6, 2012, people who witnessed the incident became angry, knowing that reliable accountability procedures against military personnel are non-existent. They attacked the soldiers, causing the death of one and serious injuries of the other one. In retaliation, 2 trucks of armed personnel of that battalion raided the village, killing Elinos Yoman and injuring many other villagers. The military burned 64 buildings, several vehicles, and killed pigs. Military forces injured 12 civilians who had to be admitted to the public hospital in Wamena for medical treatment. Torture by police is frequently reported. On Thursday, September 26, 2013, Nahor Stefanos Yalak was arbitrarily arrested by police officers and taken to the police station in Waina, Papua province, where 2 officers and 2 members of the military tortured Nahor for 1 hour, including stepping with heavy boots on different parts of his body and whipping the victim with a cable. He was then transferred to the police district office Abepura, where he was detained and from where he was released the following day. As a result of this torture, he was unable to chew due to the swellings, had bleedings and bruises, and was hardly able to walk. Indigenous Papuans are regularly arrested and detained for peaceful actions. For example, for raising the Papuan Morning Star flag or attending demonstrations and public events critical of the government or expressing independence aspirations. If convicted, they can face lengthy prison sentences, and police are also increasingly charging activists and demonstrators with possessions of weapons under an emergency law if they are found to possess a penknife or other tools of daily life in West Papua. In May 2013, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, issued an unprecedented statement condemning the ongoing suppression of freedom of expression in West Papua. At least 70 political prisoners were serving sentences in Papuan jails in December 2013. We call on this Parliament to urge the government of Indonesia to release all political prisoners. The Papuans Behind Bars project notes that political arrests in 2013 have more than doubled as compared to 2012. 29 persons were charged with conspiracy or incitement to commit treason in 2013, as compared to 2 persons in 2012. 112 political arrests were reported in November 2013. Indigenous Papuans have suffered for more than 50 years from violence by Indonesian security forces. For example, the Asian Human Rights Commission had published a report on the mass killings of thousands of Papuans during military operations against civilians in the Papuan highlands between 1977 and 1978. For this case, the Commission sees the criteria of genocide being fulfilled and calls for truth-building and accountability in respect of the victims and survivors. Civil society urges the Indonesian government to end the cycle of violence, impunity and conflict in Papua by ensuring the protection of human rights defenders from threats and intimidations, and by ensuring that perpetrators in the military and police are held criminally accountable according to international norms. Indonesia needs to provide access for UN human rights mechanisms. We call on the EU to urge the Indonesian government to provide free access to the UN Special Rapporteur on the freedom of expression and opinion to Papua. During the 2012 Universal Periodic Review of Indonesia at the UN Human Rights Council, Indonesia had agreed to invite him, but in January 2013 postponed his visit indefinitely. UN mechanisms, foreign journalists, diplomats, foreign human rights NGOs, and other independent observers face serious access restrictions or are not allowed to enter the region or to meet with civil society there. Through this Jakarta-run isolation approach, the work of civil society for indigenous peoples and their rights and human rights is often prevented and seriously limited. This conflict needs dialogue. We call on the EU to support President Yudhoyono's pledges to hold a dialogue with Papua. Churches and other peace activists in Papua and Jakarta have been calling for years for a peaceful dialogue under neutral mediation between hardliners on both sides. Jakarta shows reluctance while violations continue and conflict tensions are escalating. Papua needs to be opened up and international human rights norms be realized for Papuans. A peaceful and sustainable change cannot be expected in a climate of fear and repression of political dissent. Thank you.